The alignments to west. Some sources say the graves and St Patrick's were constructed around the same time, and some say St Patrick's and St Peter's were built around the same time. If the graves and St Patrick's were built around the same time, surely they would use the same alignment. And if St Patrick's and St Peter's were built around the same time, then they would have done the same. And if they could build the church square, they must have been able to build the chapel square. So why didn't they? It is said by some the graves may have been aligned to the setting sun or a celestial body when they were carved, and there were other theories that they were aligned on magnetic alignments. Whichever it may be, those things change over time. If there's someone out there who's got the skills with working out date ranges from alignments, then it'd be really interesting to find out where they sit on the timeline for this site. In 2005, Professor Stephen Harding gave his thoughts about this site in a documentary about Vikings in Lancashire, and it can be found on his YouTube channel.
Date-wise, we're almost on the solstice, so if they wanted to align the graves to the setting sun, you would expect it to face where the sun's going down at this moment in time. But what's really interesting is it doesn't. The graves actually align to magnetic west, which means the people who actually constructed these must have been aware of the location of magnetic north.
The reason for its odd shape is down to its placement, which does not make sense to me. If the starting point for the construction was the northeast corner on the edge of the cliff, here, then there was plenty of room to make the structure with equal sides that are square to each other without interfering with the graves on the plateau to the south and to the west of the chapel. The foundations were stabilised with concrete in past conservation works to stop the back wall from falling down, and they share the same confusing elements as the positioning. The east back wall of the chapel is perched on the edge of the cliff, with foundations of random bits of stones jammed into the cracks on the edge of the cliff to make a level base for the wall. Why would you do that when if it was built a foot further west it would be sat on solid bedrock? There is also what looks like a rough cut font or trough that has curiously found its way into the foundations. In the archaeological report from the 1970s, I think it's implied that this is a post hole in the bedrock similar to those of the rock graves, but I don't think it is. It looks more like a font or a trough or a vessel of some kind. It appears to have been worked to a clean cut finish on the inside and a grade of finish on the outside that perhaps was done by an apprentice ready for the master mason to finish. Or perhaps the outside was less important than the inside and it was meant for just functional use rather than decorational use. Hopefully somebody out there can say what it is and shed some light on what it is we're looking at and possibly the reason why it's in the foundation. The arch and doorway. The arch does not match or tie in with the masonry in the door jamb and looks as though it once sat on something else that may have once matched the fluted style of carving that the arch has. The arrangement of stones in the door jamb doesn't look right and the weathering of the arch doesn't make sense. The outside of the arch has far less erosion than the side that's inside, which makes me wonder if the original building was to the south of that wall and what we see to the north of the wall is a later addition. This stone is an oddity and has no apparent relationship with any of the other masonry in the chapel I can see. It sits in isolation, marking what could have been the place of the northwest corner of the chapel. There are some detailed sketches of the carvings in a booklet done by a lady lodging at the rectory in the Victorian era. Sadly, I forgot to bookmark it and I can't find it again. The inscriptions did not look like Latin. They could be Futhark or Colburn perhaps. It might be worth you having a look to see if you can find it. The iron pins. I wonder, was the purpose for the iron pins for transportation or a method of splitting the stone? There seems to have been a common method used after the 1800s of splitting stone, using two similar pins called feather and wedge. The feathers look similar to what we see in the stone, but usually have a shaped wedge hammered between them to split the rock. But there is no wedge or space for a wedge in these pins, so I'm not sure what we're looking at. Hopefully someone out there does and can offer a date range for the purpose of the pins. The sunken path and worn steps. My childhood memories of the area around the chapel are different to what we see today, and since I started to visit the site again regularly in the late 90s, I often wondered if I imagined it. I don't remember there being this sunken path at the rear with very worn steps that lead past the Latin carvings. There was only the ruins of the chapel, which I remember as overgrown, and the 6 rock graves in front that were full of mud, leaves, water or moss as I remember it. Then I found this film from the 1970s about the life of County Recorder Mary Davis via the Heysham Heritage website that Peter Preston has thankfully conserved on his YouTube channel, and it appears the area at the back was filled in then, judging by the route Mary takes at the back of the chapel. Perhaps this area was uncovered during one of the later digs or when the conservation was done. The painting by William Daniel. If you look at his wiki, he has some bad press for often finishing his sketches years after and embellishing the representations of the subject matter. When I saw this in Caroline's presentation, it didn't sit right with me, and I spent hours staring at it trying to work out what's wrong with it. I think the perspective and scale are not true to the site. The view of the north side of the bay seems too close. Even on a clear day, the hills on the north side of the bay are not that big from Heysham Head. The scale of the person sat on the wall is way out of proportion to the rock graves, and they're too small for a complete body burial and more likely to be ossuaries. I'm 6 foot and these 2 chaps are shorter than me, which makes the man in William's drawing tiny, as he is scaled to fit in the rock graves that are too small for an adult body in any era. William has drawn a curve heading south at the end of the graves. In reality, it's a 90-degree turn heading north. In William's defence, there is what looks like a shelf on the edge big enough to accommodate a wall and keyholes for a mortar bed to construct a wall on. So could there be the remains of a Napoleonic stockade on the opposite headland that's been long forgotten? The woods and old rectory gardens. I speeded this up because I'm not that fast on my feet. If like me you have arthritis or limited mobility etc., I've marked the routes and read that are not for me and you. At the end of the path, past St. Peter's that leads to the rock graves, there is a small entrance on your left that leads into the woods and old rectory gardens. The path is a gentle incline. On your right is another entrance that goes through the wall and it leads onto the barrows. These steps lead up to the upper level of the site and the perimeter path that goes around this part of the site. This path takes us up to the headland through what I think was the first place of worship on this site, to the old quarry face and to the first cave to be excavated and recorded on the site in the 1960s. The path opens up into a clearing with an elevated banking to the right that runs around in an arc to the old quarry face. These 2 old stone features carved from the bedrock appear to be connected with open air worship of some form. There is very little mentioned about them that I can find, other than someone thought one of them could be a socket for a wooden cross and the other one could be an early Christian altar. So far I haven't stumbled into any other examples of early Christian altars like this. If you know of any like this, please do share it in the comments. The only thing that I stumbled into that is a vague but possible local link to one of my pondiments about why would two stone altars or fonts be needed, if that's what they are, was a local Bronze Age jewel deity worshipped in Lancashire that have given up trying to pronounce his name, or her name, or their name, called, who has several stones dedicated to him, her or them in Lancaster Museum. Ross Broadstock from Britain's Hidden History did a site visit to a place in Wales that was believed to be an early Christian outdoor place of worship. That site had a similar banking, but I don't think it had any stone altars. The wear and age on these altars seemed to be similar to that of the rock graves. Whatever ceremonies and worship took place here, it was easily observable for anybody in the congregation if they were stood on the banking. The banking is intersected with an earth incline that could be backfill. The old quarry face sits in the southwestern corner of the enclosure, and it's about 3 to 4 feet in height and about 15 foot long. I have no idea how old the quarrying is, and I think it's the only visible quarrying on the site. The cave, excavated in 1967 by Lancaster Cave and Mine Research Group, is just a few feet away. As kids we call this the Hermit's Cave. It has 2 human-sized entrances that connect to each other and a third hole in the roof above a crude fire hearth carved in the cave. You can just see the light from the hole here. The fit of this roofing stone is pretty impressive. The path heads off down over some climby bits that connect up with the southern perimeter path that will bring you back onto the headland. We will go the other way and continue to the perimeter path and exit to the barrows. These 2 paths are the top of the perimeter path, and straight ahead leads onto the barrows. That just about covers it for the woods and the old rectory gardens. Well, nearly. The cave entrance I crawled into in the 1970s is in this area of the site, and I've shown you it several times if you haven't already guessed it.